Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Rinks, and I am the chair of the board for the Marin Healthcare District. And I'm pleased to invite you tonight to our community health webinar series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about bicycle safety and injury prevention. So we've got two terrific panelists tonight. We have Gwen Froh joining us. Gwen joined the Marin Bicycle County Coalition in 2008, and as director, Gwen leads the Safe Routes for Schools education and encouragement programs towards making active transportation safe and accessible for all Marin children. Her accomplishments include developing one of the first Safe Routes to School teen programs in the country. In 2016, she received the Community Partnership Award from the Marin School for Environmental Leadership in recognition of her innovative work with students. Gwen's dedication to increasing cycling throughout Marin is inspired by her passion for outstanding health. She believes that exercise is the key to physical and academic success and that it's a right, not a privilege. Gwen is often seen riding from Fairfax office to schools throughout beautiful Marin, where nature invigorates her creativity for working with children. And also joining us, we have Dr. Edward Alfrey. Dr. Alfrey is board certified general surgeon and the medical director for trauma for MarinHealth Medical Center, as well as the medical director for general surgery program for MarinHealth Medical Network. He is also a member of the Marin Healthcare District Board of Directors and an adjunct clinical professor of surgery at Stanford University. After completing his BA in chemistry at the University of Denver, Dr. Alfred earned his MD at the University of Colorado and completed his internship and residency at the University of Arizona Tucson campus. Dr. Alfrey also did a fellowship in transplantation, an area that he has a special interest in. He later earned his master's degree in healthcare management at the Harvard University and studied advanced laparoscopic surgery at UCSF. So welcome, Gwen, and welcome, Dr. Alfrey. We're going to be starting the presentation with Gwen, who is going to share some slides with you and talk to you about how to prevent bicycle injuries. So take it.
It is an honor. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And it's an honor to be with you all tonight, and especially Dr. Alfred, to be talking about this very important topic about bicycle safety and preventing injury. I first want to take a moment and dedicate this presentation to two women who have done a tremendous amount for our cycling community. Though they have passed on, their legacies live on. Deb Hudsmith, who I knew personally, was a true dynamo. She was a true visionary and pioneer for cycling in Marin County, and she actually secured the routes here in 1998 of Marin County Bicycle Coalition. Deb also co-founded the Marin Safe Routes to Schools program, one of the first of two pilot programs in the nation. Deb's never take no for an answer was shown in her tenacity and achievements, such as the Cal Park Tunnel, getting bike racks on buses, advocating for the smart bicycle pathway, and numerous other projects along the North-South Greenway. Deb was politically savvy. She advocated strongly for the cycling community in a way that could be heard and the results achieved. Deb went on to form and direct the National Safe Routes to Schools Partnership, bringing the Safe Routes to Schools program to school communities throughout the country. And Cindy Winters had a quiet yet vocal and effective advocacy voice for our cycling community. She was one of the early visionaries alongside Deb. For over 20 years, her voice of reason on behalf of her beloved cycling community was heard in planning meetings and in written proposals to county engineers. In 2019, she was voted Citizen of the Year in Larkspur. She too was an inspiration, advocating for future generations and invested in a world that would succeed her. And now I will move on to the bulk of the presentation. First, let me just announce the organization that I'm with, Marin County Bicycle Coalition. Marin County Bicycle Coalition is committed to creating healthy, connected, and a sustainable Marin by promoting bicycle for everyday transportation and recreation. There are three main programs that Marin County Bicycle Coalition offers. One is the On-Road, with events such as bike rides and policing and planning. The other one is off-road, which includes mountain biking and gravel biking. And again, events, planning, and advocacy goes on with that. And the third is education. The program goals are to make cycling safe, fun, and accessible for all users, including those new and emerging to riders. Now, the Safe Routes to Schools program is funded through the Transportation Authority of Marin through Measure AA sales tax. This is the framework in which we talk about our program. There are 6 components to the program. I will be focusing on the education component tonight, but it's important to know that we have a very collaborative process that involves engineering, enforcement. Equity is instrumental throughout all of our aspects of the program. And of course, we do evaluate our program on a regular basis to determine our success. So again, here I am to talk about education, but I also oversee the encouragement portion of the program. What we do around all the schools in Marin is we put on events and programs that promote walking and rolling to school. It helps to reduce traffic, it increases the health of our children, and of course it benefits our planet. So here's the bulk of what we're going to be talking about today. How can we keep our cyclists safe? I just want to point out that when we are talking about keeping cyclists safe, we don't use the word accident. And the good news is that because we don't use the word accident, we want you to understand that most crashes can be avoided. Most are preventable. And that's really great news for those of you who may be emerging cyclists that may be a little bit timid to go out on the roads. If you keep that in mind, that most accidents are, or most crashes are preventable, then you can take the actions to keep yourself safe. Now, what we like to say is that the first line of defense, or the first line of safety, occurs with our engineering. When we have protected bike lanes or multi-use paths, which we have throughout Marin, those are the safest places to start cycling. Having visible crosswalks is smart engineering. Having bike lanes along the roads that indicate where cyclists should ride and and keep the traffic away from where those cyclists are riding. This is all part of the infrastructure that is key to keeping people safe. And at the end of this presentation, I'll give you some of the information about the resources in terms of how you can get involved and that are working on your behalf for the safety of Marin constituents. Now, here's where I would like to focus the presentation. When we give our presentations, and we teach nearly 10,000 students throughout Marin, elementary on through high school, we talk about personal responsibility. This is where you can take the action to ensure what you can do to be safe. It is important to note that as users on the road, we are always mindful of how we have to share the road. So although we're talking about cyclist education here, it is an equal responsibility for the motorists to be aware of the rules and the road that govern all users, and that includes our cyclists. It's a shared road, it's a shared responsibility. It's also important to keep in mind that when we're talking about who is riding in Marin or anywhere, that they could be friends, they could be work associates. So it kind of personalizes who is on the road. There's incidences of road rage out there, and I'll address that at the end of this presentation. But it's important to know as a motorist and remind your friends that we're all riding the streets here. We're all destined to share the road, and it's take more time when you leave your house so that you're not frustrated when you come across a cyclist on the road. All right, so when we teach our classes, we really focus on the California Vehicle Code. This is where we start with the students. We say people who bike have the same rights and responsibilities as drivers, which I will also call motorists. That means that we must follow all the same traffic signs and signals. We ride in the direction of traffic. We use our turn signals, and we use lights at nights. The bottom line here is that bicycle safety relies on us to be predictable, visible, and to communicate our intentions. So if you take a look at the cyclist here in the picture, you'll see that she has a bright yellow vest. She's very, very visible that way. You can say she has a foot on the ground and she's looking forward and her bike is in the middle of this lane. That would tell me, that communicates to me that she has stopped, possibly for a red light, that she's going forward and she's waiting her turn at the intersection. So as cyclists, we can do a lot with our body communication and knowing exactly how we can ride on the roads legally and efficiently. So starting with the students, we start with something really simple that they can grasp. And the intention is to draw the connection between the rights of bikers and the rights of those people who are riding in the car. And the question is, do drivers and bikers always have to stop at stop signs and red lights? And according to the current law, the one that's today, that is true. We all must stop at stop signs and red lights. So again, we start with the simple stuff. Here's another very simple one for all people that are probably on this call. You probably know this by now, that we all, car drivers and bike riders, must signal when we're turning. So the same rules, same laws apply. We go through, how do you make your left-hand turn? How do you signal that? How do you make your right-hand turn? It's kind of funny, when I do this with my left arm, which is the arm that I typically use to show my turning signals, the left arm is the one that's most visible to the traffic that's pulling up on the left-hand side of me. So I tend to use my left arm. The right hand is what I use to control my rear brake. So to avoid from flipping over my handlebars, I tend to put more pressure on my rear brake with my right hand. Thereby, I signal with my left. But when I do raise my left arm in this right angle position, oftentimes cars will wave at me, which I find pretty funny, or I should say the car drivers will wave at me. This is a signal for stop. And we tell the younger kids, if you can't remember what the right-hand turn signal is, of course, you can always just simply point the direction. We start very simply in a stop position. By the time we instruct the students, we expect them to be able to bike in a straight line while signaling. And it looks, in some ways, it sounds easier than it looks, but we want to make sure that the kids will continue in a straight line while signaling without swerving. All right, this is one of the most dangerous crashes that we see on the streets. Again, I attribute it perhaps that many of the adults at this point don't know about this, and they think that the rules may be applied differently to cyclists than motorists, but this is one that we teach the kids. As Deb used to say, we're teaching the next generation. We're teaching 10,000 students a year. You can be sure that we're doing diligence and making sure that they're aware of some of these basic laws. So not only is it illegal, but it's twice as dangerous. And why is that? If you look at the motorist here in the blue car, they are looking for oncoming traffic to their left. They are not expecting a fast-moving device or bike coming in front of them from their right. Same thing, we see this quite a bit too. We see cyclists who are riding on a sidewalk and then they merge across the street, and the car driver here in the blue, they're looking for traffic coming from, again, their left. They are not expecting a fast-moving device coming into the sidewalk. They know to look for pedestrians walking, but pedestrians go at a much slower rate generally. So that's, again, a very dangerous way to go through an intersection. This is one of the questions we ask that really seems to stump our kids initially. Is biking in the middle of the lane blocking traffic? And the answer is no. Cyclists are allowed by law to use the full lane. And in many times, that is the best place for them to be, the most predictable place for them to be, and the most visible place for them to be. So again, if a cyclist is here, we have these wonderful symbols that are on many of our streets. They're called sharrows. They come from the word share the road. And that communicates to cyclists that they're allowed to ride in the middle of the lane. It also communicates to motorists that is perfectly allowed. There is something here, if you see this door, that's what we call the door zone. And that is a very dangerous place for cyclists to ride. So we encourage cyclists oftentimes to take the lane or to ride away from the door zone. In fact, the law states that you can ride down the middle of any road as long as you're not blocking 5 or more vehicles. When you do so, you can pull over. But as we teach the kids, there's such a thing as a common courtesy as well. Here's another image of a door zone. And it's actually pretty deceiving. We see a lot of families biking right up close to parked cars. And it's really, again, it's dangerous. Or we sometimes see families or adults weaving in and out of the cars. That is equally dangerous. It's called swerving in between the parked cars. And you unfortunately might pull in to get out of the way of a motorist, but then another car comes up and you won't be able to get back into the lane. So the best place to ride is what is called the pass zone here in yellow. And it's further out in the middle of the road than most people are comfortable with. Of course, the law says that passengers are required to look before they get out of their car. That is the law. But do they always do that? No. So again, riding down in the middle of the road, if you notice, this is even outside of a bike lane. So it is not mandatory that cyclists need to stay in a bike lane, because if it's not safe, they should move away from it. So here's a perfect example. Here's a group of students riding down the street. They are far away from the curb. If you look over here, there's no bike lane telling them where they should be going, but they are sufficiently away from the curb where there's debris. So this is a really good place for them to ride. If you notice, they are also staggered a little bit. It's not necessarily safe for cyclists, although we promote riding single file. It doesn't mean back to back in terms of wheels touching each other or one right after another. It's actually better to be staggered a little bit like this so you can see any upcoming obstacles that may occur in the road. This motorist is far away from the cyclist. There's still plenty of room on the road to avoid conflict with the other oncoming cars. So this is a perfect example of how we'd like to see our cyclists on our streets. We also teach let's avoid riding on sidewalks. So sidewalks, here's again why we need really great infrastructure. When competent cyclists are able to ride in the road, of course, that's the safest place for them to be. The infrastructure really needs to be there to support that, to prevent cyclists from riding on sidewalks. Of course, that riding on sidewalks may incur, conflict with pedestrians that may be there, but it's also potentially a conflict for cars that might be pulling out of driveways. So an automobile, a car driver pulling out of this driveway, their line of vision is for fast-moving vehicles that are coming up on the road, not for cyclists that are riding on the sidewalks. Again, they might glance for pedestrians, but pedestrians go at a much slower rate. And if you do need to ride on the sidewalk, we advise that you go very, very, very slowly. One last note about sidewalks. Riding on the sidewalks is up to the local jurisdiction, whether it's legal or not. So the laws that are in Mill Valley are different from the laws that are in, let's say, Larkspur. All right, you need to know what the local jurisdiction says about permission to ride on the sidewalks. For the most part in Marin County, Regardless of whether it's in the law or not, students are okay with riding in the sidewalks, and the police will not cite them for doing so. Here's another favorite of mine. I see this throughout Marin. It's how do we navigate intersections? So this cyclist here is going straight across the intersection. And here's a very dangerous potential conflict with an automobile. This driver is turning right. And I see a lot of cyclists that pull up to the right-hand side, right next to that motorist. And the motorist, unfortunately, cannot see the cyclist when they're potentially right next door to them. So that is extremely dangerous. The right thing to do, again, is to take the lane, line up behind the car that is executing the turn. Hopefully they have their signal on and they're letting you know that they're making a right-hand turn. So this picture over here to the right shows the correct way to execute the turn at an intersection, execute going through an intersection to avoid that conflict of being pinched between a right turning car. We call it a right hook, a car that's turning and the sidewalk or the on the right-hand side. Now, before you merge into traffic, as you would as a motorist driving a car, it's always important to look. Additionally, as a cyclist, there's a few more steps to do before you merge into the lane. If you look at this illustration over here, first you scan, you look over your shoulder, then you point the direction, you signal, you scan a third time, and when it's clear to do so, you merge into the lane in the direction that you are going. So that is the best way to get around this right-hand turning car right there. I'm going to talk about going through major intersections where there are multiple lanes. Now, I have seen cyclists in the bike lane thinking that they need to execute a left-hand turn from the bike lane over here to the right. And that is very, very dangerous to pull out in front of multiple lanes of traffic to go through this intersection. So again, you follow what a vehicle would do. You signal, scan, signal, scan, merge into the lane over here. It's the lane that's furthest to the left to turn left. Proceed when it's safe to do so through the intersection and come over into the bike lane on the far right-hand side of the road. If you're uncomfortable with merging into traffic, then what you could do is simply go through the intersection like this, get off your bike. Now this car is stopped waiting for the light to turn. So you would turn your bike around, get in the bike lane, wait for the light to turn, and then continue through the intersection that way. You could alternatively also get off your bike and walk your bike across the street and get on the other side. So there's more than one way to cross a street. Other safety measures now, this is going back to, some of the minor things that you can do, but important things that you can do. Always be prepared before the ride. You want to check your equipment before every ride. That includes making sure your bike and helmet fit properly. Make sure you have water, have a cell phone with you, plan your route, and also plan for emergencies. Who's your emergency contact person? Do you have that information on you? All right, so a little bit more about helmet fit, the proper way of fitting. First of all, is it imperative that we wear a helmet for children under 18 or for anyone riding on a class 3 e-bike? You must wear a helmet. That's the law. We encourage all people to wear a helmet. Again, we see many middle school students, unfortunately, unbuckled, and they think it's pretty cool because they see some of the older folks riding without a helmet at all. So we have to think mindfully about our responsibility for other citizens and wear a helmet. And it's just really good sense for adults as well. You just never know when there's going to be an obstacle that you did not see, even for the most experienced cyclists. You just don't know. And the kids typically laugh when we show this slide. There's only one true right way to wear a helmet. It really needs to be just 2 inches above the brow. The straps need to be tight around the earlobes. And when you put your fingers under the, or between your chin and the strap here, you should only be able to get 2 fingers between your chin and strap. If you have more than 2 fingers, the helmet is too loose and it will not protect your brain. Checking your bike, we teach air, brakes, and chain. The ABC quick check, very easy to remember. Always squeeze your tires, pump them up. Coincidentally, people don't think they need to pump up their tires as much as you typically do. There's a PSI indicator on the side of the tire, and you can read that and make sure that your tires are sufficiently filled with air. Squeeze the brakes to make sure they work always. Sometimes the brake pads get worn, and a way to test for this is, as in this person here, is squeezing the left brake, which controls the brake on the front of the bike, and the front back wheel comes up. Alternatively, if you squeeze the right brake, which is the rear brake, and you move your bike back, the front tire should come up. The bike should not skid or move along the pavement if you are doing that. Of course, it's easy to tell if your chain is lubed and working correctly. And if there are any questions about the function of your bike, please take it to a bike mechanic at a bike shop. A quick release check. I would always do your own quick release check, particularly if you've been carrying your bike in a car and you take it out and you want to start riding again. Make sure that quick release, which secures the tire onto the frame of your bike, make sure that that is locked into position. Unfortunately, once I got my bike out of a bike shop, I won't name names, but hopped on my bike and the quick release came loose. There was no problem with it, but I should have done my own personal check, own personal responsibility to make sure that that was safe. All right, so this is another slide, and it's geared towards, what is our reality here in Marin in terms of fatal crashes. And if you look up here, it is pretty low. This is a map mapping out the fatal crashes over a 10-year period. I believe it was from 2001 to 2011. And what is significant about this is that where there's heavy congestion and where there's speed, that is where there tends to be the most fatal crashes. In Marin, speed is the #1 cause of injury and death, and that occurs mostly through motor vehicles along the 101 corridor. So not to be doom and gloom about this, but it is truly, we need to start with awareness about what does cause and the reality of what causes fatalities and injury. And this is something that we teach our high school students. We get very real with them with our Share the Road class, because they're emerging motorists, right? They're learning how to drive for the first time. And we really need to emphasize a lot that speed is very, very important to be aware of. If you are traveling in a car at 20 miles per hour and you crash with a pedestrian, 9 out of the 10 pedestrians will survive. A mere 10 miles per hour faster than that, and only half of the pedestrians will survive. And at 40 miles per hour, well, you can see the grim reality here. The chances of surviving go way, way down. If for some reason you are in an injury crash, here are some of the tactics to take. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you are okay yourself. Secure the area. What that means is move everything out of the road so there's no other conflict with perhaps another car that's coming into place. So secure the area, make sure everybody's out of the area and safe before, and also slowly check yourself. Make sure that you don't have any injuries. You might, and Dr. Alfred might be able to talk about this further, you might go to shock and not know right away that you're injured. So really be careful about that. Don't rush to get back on your bike or leave the scene. Of course, call 911. And if everything checks out, everyone's okay, record the information. Feel free to take pictures and videos so that you can report it if need be. If there's an occurrence of road rage, again, you can feel free to call 911. Avoid the confrontation with the person who is raging at you. Record the information, file a police report, and we at Marin County Bicycle Coalition would like to know about it. We have not heard of many incidences of road rage recently, but we do want to keep abreast of that, and we work with our community at large to try to mitigate that. Now I'm just going to mention a couple of the resources here. This is our Safe Routes to Schools website, Safe Routes to Schools plural.org for Marin County. Up here is the tab that has all of our classes that are Zoom recorded. So these are the classes that we teach to all the students in all the schools. And they're right here and available. So again, I'm just covering a quick view of what we typically teach in our classes. So here's where you can go to get some more information. Additionally, here's the Marin County Bicycle Coalition website. One thing I want to note when I said you can get prepared before you go, plan your route, they have this incredible bicycle map that has routes for road riders, mountain bikers, as well as access to transit locations. So this is something that's really handy to have as you're planning your routes. Here I am, Gwen Froh, I'm the Director of Education and Encouragement. Wendy Callens is our consultant that heads up our task force meetings. And our task forces are where we pull in our city officials and our public works and our administrators and parent volunteers at schools. And we listen to the concerns of the communities. And that's where a vetting process occurs, where we identify what the infrastructure needs are to keep kids safe. And most of those projects end up being funded. So that's a really great avenue. Contact Wendy if you're interested in joining a task force meeting in your school district. Warren Wells is our policy and planning director for the roads. He heads up the advocacy for Marin County Bicycle Coalition. And Tom Boss, he heads up our events, as well as he's our off-road director. So he also advocates for the safety on our mountain bikes or our gravel bikes and our constituents that are off-road. One last other resource that you might want to contact throughout all of Marin, different cities have bike and pedestrian advisory committees. They're called BPACKs. And this group gets together and they create informed decisions with community input to direct what is needed for bicycle and pedestrian safety in their city. So you can Google this, and it's really a tremendous opportunity for your voices to be heard to keep yourself and others safe. And I'm just going to stop at this point and say thanks so much for listening to the presentation. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer at this time.
Thank you so much, Gwen. That was just fantastic. We learned so much information from you about how to stay safe on bikes. And thank you for all the tremendous work you're doing with our school children. Such an important amount of work. And next up, we've got Dr. Edward Alfrey, and he's going to talk about what might happen if you actually don't manage to avoid a crash. So as hard as people can work to keep us safe, we know sometimes people aren't always safe on bikes. And Dr. Alfrey is going to share with us a little bit about what happens if there is in fact an injury. So take it away, Dr. Alfrey.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Gwen. I first want to compliment and thank the bicyclists and residents of Marin County because of the very, very high incidence of helmet wearing. I'll show us a little bit of research we've done at our trauma center, and the number of bicyclists in Marin County that wear helmets is much, much higher than most other counties in reported research studies. I'm sure that is in a large part due to the wonderful job that Gwen and the Marin Safe Routes to School has done teaching the children, as well as the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. To start off with, I do want to say that I want to re-emphasize the importance of making sure when you get on your bicycle that you do all the things that she said, that you make sure that the bicycle is safe. So you, just like if you got on an airplane, you see the pilots walking around the airplane and checking things. You want to do the same thing with your bike. Make sure that there's air in the tires, that the brakes are working, you're comfortable with the seat height and all those important things. And it's also very, very important to make sure you understand the route that you're taking, because the majority of bicycle crashes that we have in Marin County are from reported problems in the road. It's interesting because, again, I think in part because of the Safe Routes to School program, we very rarely see kids coming into our trauma center that have been severely injured in bicycle crashes. The general, sort of the average person we see is more my age. They have expensive bikes. They've been riding a long time. And fortunately, they're usually wearing helmets. But I think, once again, in part to the wonderful job that has been done teaching our children, we just do not see very many kids interested in bicycle crashes. If we, Louis, if we can start sharing the slides I sent you. I just wanted to, this was, we did a study at our trauma center over a 9-year period. We looked at sort of the demographics of people that are injured in bicycle crashes at our trauma center. And we had, over this 9-year period, there's about almost 7,100 patients. And in that, there was about 13% of those, just slightly less than 15%, that were injured in bicycle crashes. Bicycle crashes are the second most common reason for admission to our trauma center. And so we're just very interested in, again, in looking at the demographics and some of the injuries that occur. Part of the reason that there are so many bicycle crashes is not because the Marin County bicycle riders are not safe riding. It's because it is a 12-month-a-year sport and activity in Marin County, and as you all know, there's a lot of people riding their bikes, and so again, it's not the high incidence of crashes is not because the people are not safe. It's because there's so many people riding their bikes. We were interested in helmets because it seems sort of counterintuitive that if you're wearing a helmet, it will be safe. But we really wanted to look at what type of injuries and the differences that we saw in helmeted versus not helmeted. As I mentioned, one of the things that struck me the most interesting when we did some research into bicycle crashes is that there are some centers reporting their experiences where as low as 10 or 15% of the bicycle riders were wearing helmets, which is almost hard to believe that there are so many people riding bicycles that, for what reasons that are unclear to me, are not wearing helmets. In our series of 900 patients over this 9-year period, the mean age was 42, and the injury severity score is just a way to understand how severely injured. This is a moderate to moderately low injury severity score. And then if patients are admitted to the hospital, in other words, they have injuries severe enough that they need monitoring in the hospital, the average length of stay is slightly under 3 days. Not too surprising to myself, if you look at the gender of the bicycle crash victims, about 3/4 of them are male. The one thing that I think some people believe is that people involved in bicycle crashes are drinking or doing drugs. And quite frankly, that is very, very uncommon in Marin County. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but I think that the majority of the high majority of people that are drinking or doing drugs in Marin County, fortunately, are not getting on their bikes, or if they are getting on their bikes, they're not getting in crashes. If we look at the next slide, which just shows the type of injuries we see, the one injury that that I didn't put on here that is universal, and we don't really track this, because if you're injured in a bicycle crash, you're going to have some abrasions or what's more commonly known as road rash. So I don't have that on there. Everybody has road rash if they fall on their bike somewhere. But the interesting thing is that the most common injury is a concussion. We typically see rib fractures, clavicle fractures, which is, as you know, is the collarbone. And not uncommonly, although I don't have the numbers here, we do occasionally have somebody that has a collapsed lung. So if you have a rib fracture, for those of you that experience that, you understand this very well, but the pain from rib fractures usually continues on for several days. We tell people if they have a collapsed lung, however, that the one limit is that they shouldn't be getting on an airplane for at least a month. We do have ways to solve it. If the collapse of the lung continues to increase, we can take care of that with the procedure, and that would increase the length of stay. But these are the most common, again, excluding everybody that has road rash. These are the most common injuries that we see. On the next slide, I think there are some other less common. If I was to tell you what the typical cyclist injury would be, it would be rib fractures, a collarbone or clavicle fracture, and then road rash, but in addition to having a concussion. Some of these other injuries are much less common. Unfortunately, things like spinal cord injuries are very, very rare. On the next slide, the thing that was, I guess, not surprising, but it's important to realize is that if you are wearing a bicycle helmet, as you should, the chances of having a concussion are still very, very high. But the one thing that a bicycle helmet will prevent is a serious head injury, things like skull fractures or subdural or epidural type hematomas or brain bleeds. And the other thing that was a little bit surprising was that the incidence of facial fractures was significantly less in helmeted bicycle riders that were involved in a crash. And I don't really have an explanation for that, other than if you have a helmet on, maybe people smartly, as they fall towards the helmet rather than their face. But again, the incidence of, and I apologize that the number here is slightly wrong, but if you have a helmet on, the chances of having a serious head injury, which is the bottom line, is about 4%. It's 3.9 or 4%, 8 out of 205 versus 6 out of 700, which is only less than 1%. And again, I apologize, the number was supposed to be 3.9%, but anyway, the difference in less than 1 versus fourfold increase. So sort of in conclusion, if you look at the last slide, is the most common injury outside of road rash is a concussion, and wearing a helmet does not prevent a concussion. What we do see is there's a variety of outcomes from concussion, and I'm sure you've all heard a lot about it, particularly in the NFL. But concussions can have long-term lasting effects. And the one thing that we didn't do and would require another sort of longitudinal study is what type of long-term effects do patients have that were wearing a helmet and have a concussion versus not. Intuitively, you would think, and I'm sure what we would find is that if you were wearing a helmet and you had a concussion, it would be very, the long-term effects would be very small compared to someone that had a concussion without wearing a helmet. In other words, what we typically see is patients have can have headaches, they can have photophobia, nausea, and those sort of things. But again, the actual definition of a concussion is such that the patients or bicycle riders that crash will have a concussion even wearing a helmet. But again, my belief is, and I'm sure that we could identify this with a study, is that the seriousness of the concussion will probably be significantly less in bicycle riders that crash that are wearing a helmet. But the important thing is that helmeted bicycle riders that crash are significantly less likely to have a serious head injury, including skull fractures or facial fractures. And so, as we would expect from a study like this, bicycle riders should always wear a helmet. They prevent serious injuries. Again, I think that in part, in a large part, due to the work that the Safe Routes to Schools and the Bicycle Coalition has done, is that the number of serious injuries we see are very, very low because of the very high usage of helmets in Marin County. I am very happy to answer any questions if we have any.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alfrey. And also I want to let everybody know that Dr. David Klein, our CEO of the district and MarinHealth Medical Center, is joining us as well. So one question, Dr. Alfrey, that immediately comes to mind is, how many of the injuries, and do you know, are they repeat injuries? Are these like people that are getting repeatedly injured because maybe they're riding in a risky fashion, or are these all unique individuals that are being injured?
So I don't know the actual number, and I would be very cautious about these highly educated professionals calling them risky.
Okay, not risky, but you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. And I'm very careful how I term my words.
Sorry about that.
We have, excuse me, not an insignificant number of repeat bicycle crashes. I can't think of the number of times I've had, as I've started describing the injuries to a patient, they said, "Oh yeah, that happened on the left side when I fell last time," and that sort of thing. And so it's not an uncommon event. And again, in part, it may be because of the people that are riding. Again, the majority of people riding that crash in Marin that have injuries are experienced riders. So they're not, people that jumped on a bike and, they're drunk and stuff like that. We have a small but not insignificant number of people injured in bicycle crashes that start over on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge and have not really been told or recognized that the descent in this Sausalito is quite severe. And so we have visitors from out of state and even out of the country that can be seriously injured again in that situation, but that's not the routine. The routine is relatively experienced bicycle riders that have good equipment, and not uncommonly they're repeat crashers.
And are the causes of crashes, or is part of the crashing, is it a crash with a motor vehicle? Are they on the street riding, or are they off-road on a mountain bike and they're sort of crashing solo? Do you have any info on that?
Yeah. So mountain bike crashes with serious injuries are fortunately very rare, and I can't explain that because it seems to me that they are more aggressive riders, but maybe there are even safer. But the variety of other causes is quite interesting. It's not, occasionally somebody will have a crash with a car, but it's a really wide spectrum. I frequently hear the experienced riders say, "I didn't realize there's a new pothole on the descent out of some road or something like that." So it's quite variable. And again, it's probably always a perfect storm. As Gwen had mentioned, sometimes cars don't do what they're supposed to do, and so you take an experienced rider that knows where they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to take a left and a right and that sort of thing, and then you throw in some variable like somebody that dodged in a car that dodges a dog running out. So it's very interesting when you talk to them, but it would be hard to say that this is the most common reason, because the reasons they crash are quite variable. The other thing that we didn't really do in this study, because it's very hard to quantitate correctly, is to correlate it with speed. But I can tell you for sure, the more seriously injured bicycle riders are always saying I was going pretty fast. And because it's harder to again identify, you can't get out there with your tape measure and measure the skid marks and stuff like that like they can do with vehicles. We don't really know, but I can tell you for sure that it's pretty rare somebody riding 5 miles an hour is seriously injured in a bicycle crash, unless they happen to run into a stop sign or something.
Great. And Gwen, you mentioned infrastructure, and so did you, Dr. Alfrey. Gwen, can you tell us a little bit about how Safe Routes for Schools sort of addresses infrastructure issues? Because we're hearing like a pothole can cause a crash. So what efforts are being made to really improve our biking infrastructure in Marin?
Great question, Jennifer. Thank you. Well, there's two avenues to approach. If you have school-age children and you notice that there are some unsafe infrastructure issues that you're concerned about, and it could be hedges that are overgrown. I mean, it could be a number of things, right? Then we would recommend that those individuals, whether it be a family person or a neighborhood individual, look up Wendy Callens and join the task force meeting where those issues are documented, discussed, prioritized, and oftentimes funded. And again, that is where we pull together our city officials, our planners, our engineers. It's really it saves people the time from having to go and advocate for those changes at their city council meeting. Okay, the other avenue, as I mentioned, for some of the bigger concerns would be the local pedestrian bicycle advocacy advisory committees, BPACKs. So those, they differ from city to city, and most of the cities have them in Marin. That would be a great place to check and report those challenges. Additionally, Marin County Bicycle Coalition on their website has a page to track that. If you can't find it, contact Warren Wells. He definitely wants to hear about it. And he, again, works with the city officials and public works very, very closely. He's got the connections to let them know that there are some situations that really need to be addressed.
Great. So another question for either you or Dr. Alfrey, or maybe both of you, are all helmets sort of created equal, or are there better bike helmets, especially, thinking about being a parent and having a child that's out riding a bike and sort of getting confident enough to allow them to ride to school? What do you recommend in terms of helmets for really protecting them? And then can you reuse a helmet after you've fallen off your bike and bumped your head?
Go ahead, Gwen.
Another great question. We're probably both eager to answer this one. The helmets are not all created equal. I will say that the fit is really a primary concern, making sure that it doesn't fall off a student's head. I'm not an expert on helmets in terms of what is the best on the market these days, but I will say this. The helmet should be rotated every 3 years, and if it has been dropped or smashed or somehow injured itself, it needs to be immediately replaced. Dr. Alfrey, would you like to add to that?
I agree entirely. I don't know about buying helmets at places other than bicycle shops, but I can guarantee if you buy a helmet at a bicycle shop, it'll meet the approval of things like the Department of Transportation. And I can't think of anything more important than spending an extra $30 or $40 for an appropriate bicycle helmet when you think that, we stop and get a couple pieces of sushi for $20 or $30, but you don't want to spend the same for a bicycle helmet. The fit, as Gwen said, is critically important. And as far as wearing it after a crash, it really depends on the condition of the helmet. A lot of the helmets I see are pretty damaged, and I would not recommend wearing them again. And it's for that reason alone that they should be wearing a helmet, because I can't imagine what their head would look like if they weren't wearing a helmet.
Great.
Say one other thing about that. If you are involved in a crash, and keep your helmet with you when you go to the emergency room, because the doctors will be able to assess where you actually hit your head.
Wow.
So keep your
Right.
helmet with you, bring it to the emergency room.
I do have just a quick personal story. It was not a bicycle helmet, but it was a helmet snowboarding. But my oldest son, when he was very argumentative when he first had to started wearing helmets. And within about an hour of the first time he went down, somebody came by out of control and ricocheted off his helmet, and there was a huge gash in the helmet. And then he sat up and he said, "Man, I'm glad I have that helmet on."
Well, with that, do you have any suggestions about how to get people to wear helmets that are a bit reluctant? I know when my daughter was younger, she didn't, fashion wise, it didn't sort of fit with her outfits and she didn't like what it did to her hair. So for both kids and maybe Gwen, for kids and adults, because it sounds like based on the data that we actually have a problem with adults not wearing the helmets.
That's a funny one, Jen. Yeah, it brings to mind a video that we saw. We used to play at the schools called Beauty and the Bike. It was typical of many teenage girls that were concerned about their hair and how they would look. And so there were some tips in that we would show the students.
Oh, that's funny.
It's just part of what you need to do. It's just, and wearing a helmet, I equate it to getting into a car and putting your seat buckle on. At first, it may seem awkward. Before laws were passed, no one wanted to do it. Now it's become the norm. The more we normalize these things, the more people will do it. So wearing a bike helmet it's just appropriate. I know women who they get flathead from wearing a helmet, and they bring a fun cap or hat with them to wear afterwards. So yeah, but there's nothing like protecting the brain.
Don't worry about flathead.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, Dr. Rinks, I would recommend going to counties outside of Marin and asking them why they're not wearing helmets, because again, 75% of our bicyclists that are injured in crashes are wearing helmets. So I don't know why somebody would not wear a helmet. I know for kids, they have the bicycle shops that sell good helmets also on the top of them. They have those funny things like Spider-Man type things, and so maybe that encourages them. I've really, other than my oldest son, the wearing a helmet for snowboarding, I really haven't had any trouble with it, and so I can't answer that. And I don't know that we could ask the Marin County residents, because they seem to be doing a pretty good job.
So for the ones that you've seen in the hospital that weren't wearing helmets, are they then saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to wear a helmet now that I've crashed and I've hurt myself"? I kind of get it's important to do that.
I wish I could say yes.
Okay. And then for Gwen, how do you recommend new and emerging riders get started with biking? I know during the pandemic, bike sales went through the roof. I think a lot of people who hadn't been bike riding maybe started bike riding. Older people who hadn't been riding went back to riding. How do you recommend people get into bike riding in a safe fashion?
Absolutely. We always recommend having the proper bike fit. I did not cover it in this presentation, but obviously there are places that you can Google to pull up whether your bike fits you or not correctly. That's the first place to start. Properly fitting bike and helmet. The next thing is to prepare. We talked about route maps. But even taking it a step further than that, if you're a brand new rider or you have kids that are learning how to ride, the best place to start is on a blacktop or a unused parking spot, so that you can practice driving your bike in a straight line, practice balancing with one hand while you execute your hand signals, practice putting even an obstacle on the ground or a pretend obstacle, and being able to pivot your bike, your front wheel quickly out and back. So obstacle avoidance, all these things that you need to know before you actually ride on the street, and having the confidence to be able to navigate on a blacktop, riding in a straight line, confidence to stop quickly. I said obstacle avoidance. That's a big one. We're talking about potholes. We need to be able to quickly swerve out of the way while going in a straight line. And we're taught that. We practice that ourselves as instructors, how to move that front handlebar very, very quickly. So all of that takes time. It's not necessarily something that you just hop on a bike and you do, or should practice while you're on the street, you know.
Mhm.
And then the next step is go with a trusted, experienced cyclist who can take you and direct you on the roads, and show you how to navigate the roads a little bit more easily. So
Okay.
those are my recommendations for emerging riders.
Great. And speaking of obstacles, what about the multi-use paths? I know that there's, we've got skateboarders, we've got bicyclers, we've got joggers, we've got walkers on those. What sort of etiquette should people follow on multi-use paths to avoid collisions?
I'm going to start with the law first. The law says that regardless of what kind of bike you're riding, whether it's a road bike or an e-bike or whatever, you must go 15 miles an hour on a multi-use pathway. Pedestrians always have the right of way. So we say biking etiquette on a pathway is to slow down and announce to the pedestrian that you're going to be going around that individual. Now, of course, many people are listening to their cell phones, or they have their buds in. They may not be able to hear you, which is why you need to really slow down. And again, now most of the bike paths are marked with a dotted line in the middle of it, and cyclists know to ride to the right, but if it's not marked with a dotted line, you should still ride to the right.
Great. All right. I think that takes care of all the questions that have come in so far. I just want to see if Dr. Klein has any questions for our panelists.
No questions other than just thanks and gratitude for covering such an important topic. And we hope never to see any of you here in the hospital or our emergency room. So I think a lot of great tips from both Gwen and Dr. Alfrey. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. And so as we wrap up this webinar, do you have any final tips or any last words that you'd like to share with us? We'll start with Gwen and then move on to Dr. Alfrey.
Prepare, have confidence about what you're doing, and really, truly, riding a bicycle is magical. It's absolutely magical. And it really opens up the brain for longevity, for learning. So I encourage people to get out there, but to do so smartly. Be responsible, learn what you need to learn, prepare, and then just go ahead and enjoy the ride.
Great.
I'd say the same. It's great exercise. It's if you're going to be injured in a bicycle crash, it's great that you're very, very healthy. So enjoy it, be safe, wear a helmet. And my hope is that I will see you at Safeway, but not in the emergency department.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all. And this concludes another one of our community health seminars. And we will be holding more of these seminars in the future. And you can always watch these on the district's website. So thank you all so much and have a great evening, everyone.